Slope and Y-intercept. I suggest you get a piece of graph paper out for these notes. That'll help you make better sense of them, and they can be a little neater that way. If you've ever been skiing before, then you've heard of a ski slope, and ski slopes can be really steep or they can be somewhat flat. And the steep slopes, do you know what we call those? Those are black diamonds. And then the flatter slopes, that's where anybody can go down them. That would be like a bunny slope. And that would be what this guy's going down. He's going down a little bunny slope, just a very slight decline. So he'd be going really slow, wouldn't he? And this guy would be speeding down there. So write this down. Slope is the tilt of a line, or its rise over run. That's how we calculate it. And we're going to use the words steep or flat to describe them. Alright, go ahead and draw a couple examples below like I have. So the first one is a slight increase from left to right. The next one is a big increase from left to right. The third one is a big decrease from left to right. And the fourth one is just a slight decrease from left to right. Underneath those lines, write positives increase from left to right, but negatives are going to decrease from left to right. Alright? How would you describe this first line? Well, what words would we use? Would you use steep or flat? Yeah, we should use flat, so that would be a flat positive. What about the next one? What would you use to describe that? Yeah, steep positive. What about our third one? What words would you use? Steep negative. And for our last one, what words would you use? Flat negative. Alright, if you need extra time, you can pause the video. And now let's ski onward. Actually, this one looks like more fun. Two more types of slopes I want you to know are zero slope and undefined. And zero slope, just think you're going nowhere. So you wouldn't even move if you were trying to ski on this slope. You'd just be standing there waiting. Now undefined though, my goodness, if you were on an undefined slope, you'd be going so fast, we couldn't even define how fast you were going. Alright, now let's think visually how to remember this. You have a really big positive slope here represented by this line because it's really steep. And then if it gets less steep, like this, it's still positive because it's increasing, but it's more flat now, isn't it? And finally, it's a lower positive number until it gets to 0. And then it starts to become negative as it starts to decrease from left to right. So that could be like negative 1/5, maybe negative 1/3, maybe negative 1/2, maybe negative 1. So it gets to be a bigger negative decrease here. That could be like negative 4, negative 5, until eventually it gets so negative or so much of a decline there that if it becomes a straight up and down line, it's going so fast that we can't define it. So that's the best way to make sense of that. Just think big positive, smaller positive, 0, and then it starts to become negative, more negative until it's undefined. Alright, let's find the slope by graphing. So let's graph 2, 4 and -3, -2, and we're going to find the slope. So go ahead and use your graph paper, make a vertical y-axis and a horizontal x-axis like I have here. And now let's graph 2 comma 4. How do we graph 2, 4? We go right 2 and then up 4. So if I go right 2 and up 4 from the origin, it's going to be right about there. And now let's graph -3, -2. That means I go left and then down. So left 3 and down 2. And I'm just going to find what's my rise and my run. Remember, that's what slope is. It's how much you rise over how much you run. So how much do I rise to get from that point to that point? I'm going to draw an arrow going straight up and then an arrow going straight across. I'm going to write how many units that is. And when I count, I always count from 0. So, because I'm counting distance. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's 6 blocks up, so I'm going to put a 6 right here. How many blocks across is that? Well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'm going to put a 5 right there. So my rise and my run, it can just be 6 over 5. And I always want to check, is it a positive slope or a negative slope? Well, if I were to connect those 2 points, you can see it's increasing from left to right, so it's positive 6/5. Alright, we can try one more of those guys. Okay, now let's graph -1 comma 2 and 3 comma -4, and we're going to find the slope. So again, make another graph, so your y-axis, your x-axis. And we're going to graph -1, 2, so that means I go left 1, up 2, and I put a point. So right about there. And then 3, -4, I go right 3 and down 4. And I put a point right about there. I'm going to connect them with a line. And the slope of the line is going to be represented by rise over run. So I'm going to write rise over run. And now I'm just going to draw a line from my lower point and go straight up, and then draw a line from there and go straight across. So I have 2 parts, the rise and the run. And let's count how many blocks up it is. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I'm going to put a 6 there. And then across I have 1, 2, 3, 4 blocks. So my rise and run is going to be, it rises 6, it runs 4. Now be careful, we always need to think about our sign. Is this an increasing or decreasing? Well, from left to right it's decreasing, it's going down. So that makes this a -6 over 4. And now divide by your common factor to reduce it. So we divide each of these by 2. And what's your slope going to be? -3 over 2. Always leave your slope as a fraction. It's okay if it's an improper fraction. Alright. Next topic. Sliding over to the next page. Our slope formula, if we have ordered pairs, is going to be y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Now keep in mind, we can always graph them and do it that way, but what if you don't have graph paper, or you're dealing with decimals or fractions, or this may be a better way for you. So slope formula is going to be y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So those numbers just represent the first y or the second y. So let's do an example with that. Okay, example 1. Find the slope through -2, 6 and 4, -4. Well, here's our first step. We're going to label each coordinate. So we're going to label those coordinates. So we know that the first term is always the x term. So I'm going to label those both x. We know the second term is always the y term. So I'm going to label those both y. And then you get to choose really which one you want to be the first ordered pair and which one you want to be the second ordered pair. Well, I'm just going to choose my -2 and 6 to be my firsts, and the 4, negative 4, those can be my second ordered pairs. So that number, that's all it stands for. Is it the first one or the second one? And you get to pick, and it would be right either way. Now we just plug them into your formula. So plug into formula. So think about what would come next. My y2 is negative 4, so I plug in negative 4. And then it says minus y1 in our formula, so my y1 is 6, so I do minus 6. And then it's x2 minus x1 on the bottom, so x2 is 4. And then my formula has a minus in it. I need to be very careful here. So my formula has a minus, but I have a negative for my x1. So it's minus a negative 2. Now you know better than to use double signs. So if you have minus a negative, it's really what? Yeah, it's really a big plus sign. So negative 4 minus 6 is negative 10. I'm just going to simplify. 4 plus 2 is 6. And now I just need to reduce it. So divide by your common factor of 2. And we get negative 2 divided by 10 is negative 5. 6 divided by 2 is 3. It's simplified. And that's going to be your slope. Negative 5/3. Alright, you try one. Alright, there's example 2. Find the slope through 6, negative 2, 4, negative 8. If you want to try it on your own, go ahead and pause the video. If you need my assistance, here's a solution. Alright, I wrote my formula down, y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. My first step is to label the coordinates. So that's my x, my y, my x and my y. That's the easy part. And then I just have to choose which one is my first group. I'm going to call that one my first group. Which one's my second group? The 4 and the negative 8. Now I just plug them in. So y2 is negative 8. My y1 is negative 2, and I have a minus sign there, so it's minus a negative 2, which is really what? A big plus sign. So negative 8 plus 2. And then on the bottom, I have my x2 is 4, and then minus. Don't forget that minus sign. That's where you're probably going to make mistakes if you make them. And then the x1 is 6. Now I'm just going to simplify the top and bottom. 8 plus 2 is 10. 4 minus 6 is negative 2. And it's not simplified, so divide by my common factor of 2. And 10 divided by 2 is 5. Negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1. So I can either say it's 5 negative 1, or I can simplify that and make it a whole number, or an integer rather, which would be negative 5. Either answer is acceptable, but the top one is better for as far as graphing, because that shows me that's my rise, my 5, and my negative 1 is my run. But if you were writing that as an equation, the negative 5 would be the best way to write it. So either way, you need to be able to represent it either way. Alright, the y-intercept is my y value when x equals 0. And I know it's on the y-axis. That's my vertical axis. So that's what the y-intercept means. So if I had a line going right through here, where does that cross the y-axis? Right there. So my y-intercept there would be 2. If I drew another line like this, what would my y-intercept be for that? Where does it cross the y-axis? Right there. So my y-intercept would be down 1, which is negative 1. So that's your y-intercept. That's how it works. Alright, now I'm going to show you, if we get it into y equals an equation, it's really easy to graph if we use our slope and our y-intercept. So that's what's next. Alright, this is our last note. It's about slope-intercept form. And you're going to use this an awful lot, so let's get it down. Slope-intercept form is y equals mx plus b. and M is how you move, or it's the slope, and B is where you begin, or the y-intercept. And I'm going to put those words in quotes just for memory tools. Slope is how you move, y-intercept is where you begin. And those are memory tools. So B stands for begin, M stands for move. That's just a memory tool, since honestly the letters don't really make that much sense, do they? Well, now they do. Alright, and now let's go ahead and practice graphing using that information. So here's our first example with graphing using slope-intercept form. Okay, write down graph y equals negative 3x plus 1. And I'm going to label what my slope and my y-intercept are. The negative 3 is my slope, and the 1 is my y-intercept. I just use INT to abbreviate there. So always start with where you begin, or my y-intercept. So I begin at positive 1. So on my y-axis, where's positive 1? At up 1. And then how do I move? What's my slope? Well, I'm going to write it as a fraction. So negative 3 over what? Yeah, I can write it over 1. So I'm going to look at negative 3 over 1. And if it's a negative 3, is that going to tell me, remember this is rise over run, what do negative numbers do? Do they go up or down? Yeah, they go down. What do positive numbers do for the run? They go to the right. So from that point that I've graphed, my y-intercept, I'm going to go down 3. So down 1, 2, 3, and then I'm going to go right 1, and that's where I'm going to put my point. And I can keep doing that. So go down 3, 1, 2, 3, and then right 1, put my point. I can also do the opposite. So for my y-intercept, I can do up and left. So up 1, 2, 3, and then left 1, put a point. Up 1, 2, 3, and then left 1, put a point. And then finally, I'm just going to connect those to make a straight line. Alright, we're going to do one last one. Well, you can do it on that same graph. So I'm just going to put the direction off to the right of that. So we're going to graph, let's say, y equals 1/2 x minus 3. So y equals 1/2 x minus 3. What's my slope? 1/2. What's my y-intercept? Negative 3. So I always begin with my y-intercept. So I go down 3 because that's a negative 3. So down 1, 2, 3 from the origin. And I put a point. And then the slope tells me how I move. And remember, that's rise over run. So it's 1 over 2. So if it's positive 1, I go up 1. And then positive 2 for the run, I go right 2. So from that point, go up 1, right 2. Up 1, right 2. You can keep doing that. Up 1, right 2. Or we could go the inverse, or the opposite, which is down 1, left 2. So from that y-intercept, go down 1, left 2. Down 1, left 2. And then just connect your line, and you have your graph. Alright, that sums it up. See you at the slopes.